It happened because he was an old black man who didn't earn much. 78-year-old Leonard Cole took a clean, vicious slap from Police Lieutenant Blake Harrington right there in the courtroom. No warning, no hesitation. The blow cracked through the stale air like a crowbar on steel. Leonard's blood dotted his bifocals, but Harrington didn't even twitch. He thought he'd just shoved a lesser man back into place. What he didn't see was the figure in the back row, watching in silence, memorizing every angle. That man was Leonard's son, FBI Special Agent Mason Cole. Harrington believed silence meant safety. He was wrong. What price waits for a man convinced he can crush people who can't fight back, certain they'll swallow the humiliation forever? Keep listening. Winston Hill's courthouse air was thick with varnish, burnt coffee, and worn-out justice. The ceiling fan churned lazily, groaning like an old engine that measured time instead of cooling anyone. Leonard Cole rose carefully, bones slow but posture steady. 78, but his spine still knew how to stand tall. He didn't straighten because of ego. Pride had been forged into something tougher decades ago. He stood tall because some men never unlearn that lesson, even when the world keeps insisting they shrink and apologize. Something shifted when he squared his shoulders before the bench. No sound, just a change in pressure, like the air itself paused. Lieutenant Blake Harrington noticed. He always noticed when the wrong kind dared occupy space. Middle-aged, pale hair cut to regulation, jaw like a padlock. Harrington wore his badge like ownership papers. His uniform was razor-pressed, broadcasting a message. I iron my authority, sharper than my conscience. He stepped forward eagerly. His boots were deliberately loud against the polished floor. His jaw was already tight before a word left his mouth. "What the hell are you standing up for?" he barked, voice bouncing off the paneled walls. "Go back to your damn hole, old man." The insult landed, but the words weren't the worst part. The worst part was that Harrington didn't wait for a response. He wasn't interested in reasons, only dominance. His hand moved before his sentence even finished. Fast, sharp, rehearsed. A reflex he'd practiced on bodies that never got justice. The slap rang out like a judge's gavel slammed in fury instead of law. Leonard's head snapped sideways with the impact. His glasses slid crooked, a thin streak of blood curving across one lens like a cruel red underline. The sound wasn't what froze the room. It was the stillness afterward. Violence didn't need volume to be loud. No one rushed forward. No one shouted. One woman flinched, turning her face away. Another lifted her phone, pretending to check messages, while secretly recording on shaky hands. Somebody's breath caught and stayed trapped. But no protests came. No outrage erupted. Just the practiced cowardice of people who'd learned speaking up gets you nowhere, while looking away gets you home in one piece. Harrington didn't flinch. His expression curled into something between a smirk and a snarl, smug and undisturbed. He wiped his palm on his uniform pants like Leonard's skin had contaminated him. "Should have stayed seated," he muttered. He didn't bother whispering. Leonard didn't stumble. He didn't raise his voice, didn't demand a lawyer, didn't call for the bailiff. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a soft, time-worn white handkerchief instead. He dabbed at the blood on his lip with slow precision, more focused on the stain on the cloth than the cut on his mouth. A single drop of red sat dead center on his lens like a target. He didn't wipe it away. He let it stay. Harrington watched him for a heartbeat longer, waiting for fear, rage, anything. When none came, he scoffed and strutted back to his seat, satisfied with his performance. No one stopped him. Not the judge. Not security. Not the system that claimed to protect men like Leonard. The silence roared, mean and mocking. Then a man rose from the very last row of benches. He made no sound, didn't have to. His presence shifted the air. Taller than Harrington, he held himself like someone used to disappearing in plain sight. Dark suit, no tie, federal badge tucked just out of view. He looked toward the front, but not at Harrington. His gaze found Leonard. No dramatic reaction, No widened eyes, no trembling mouth. He simply inhaled once, quietly, then walked out. That was Mason Cole, Leonard's son. He didn't slam the door or shout threats. He didn't demand justice on the spot or break protocol. He slipped from the courtroom like violence was routine, like he'd seen this before. But this time, it hit blood. Nobody connected them yet, old man and younger stranger, father and son. To most onlookers, Mason was just another disgusted spectator leaving early. But to anyone really watching, something under the surface had shifted irrevocably. Outside, the afternoon sun didn't care about courtroom cruelty. It spilled across the courthouse steps, like it did every day. Mason didn't pause to enjoy it. His footsteps beat a steady rhythm, every step deliberate, contained. His jaw was tight, not with blind anger, but calculation. The kind of tension that meant nothing would be forgotten and everything would be filed away, pulled out when it mattered most. Inside, the hearing limped forward. Harrington smirked again from his seat, arms folded, jaw tilted like a man certain he'd won some unspoken game. The judge shuffled documents. A clerk typed. Justice rolled on, greased with the blood of the exhausted. But blood on glass is stubborn. It doesn't wipe away clean when it means something. Leonard didn't rush out. He stood still, hands behind his back, eyes fixed on the space Harrington had occupied, gaze patient. He wasn't angry. He was waiting. That quiet waiting would become a trigger. That slap would become more than humiliation. It would become evidence, spark, and stain. While the room resumed its drone, Mason didn't drift. He walked 3 blocks to a nondescript black sedan, plates registered to nowhere real. Sliding into the driver's seat, his hands were rock steady, his expression blank. This wasn't the moment to speak. It was to record. He tapped the dashboard twice. A secure FBI interface lit up, bypassing public networks. He entered his credentials from memory, then killed the cabin lights, so only the screen glowed faint blue inside the car. Internal courthouse camera feeds loaded from multiple angles. No edits, no gaps yet. The footage was still raw, untouched by anyone with an agenda. Mason scrubbed through the timeline until he found the moment the slap landed. Angle 1. Harrington's arm slicing sideways, movement unmistakable. Angle 2. Leonard's head whipping right, glasses knocked askew, blood blooming at his lower lip. Angle 3. A close shot of Harrington's face, just before his hand connected. Mason froze the image and zoomed in. Harrington's pupils were wide. No panic, no regret. Just heat, satisfaction, the high of unchecked power. That look said this wasn't his first time, and he expected it wouldn't be punished. That expression, more than the slap or blood, was the true trigger. Not a mistake, but a habit. Mason didn't blink. He reached up, took the earpiece clipped to the visor, and pressed it into his ear. He tapped twice. A soft tone confirmed a secure channel. No small talk, no introduction. Activate subject Blake Harrington. TRA-3 monitoring. Real-time behavioral surveillance. Retroactive file integration. The voice responding was clear, practiced. Confirmed authority, Agent Mason Cole. Clearance level 6. Code ID, Delta, November 7. Applause protocol. Proceeding. The line went dead. Mason leaned back, fingertips tapping the steering wheel. Rhythm slow, bone knocking gently against leather. His father had bled long before today. Mason remembered bruises from years ago that never got a story. Leonard never explained. Mason never needed it. Harrington wasn't the disease, just a festering symptom covered by polished uniforms. The system hid its sores under shiny badges and legalese. This time, though, it picked the wrong target in front of the wrong witness. Harrington thought he'd smacked a disposable old man. He'd assaulted Mason Cole's father. And Mason Cole was many things: controlled, patient, quiet, but above all, relentless. Inside the courthouse, Tension faded again. Dockets resumed. Lawyers shuffled. Bureaucracy hummed. Outside, Mason's resolve crystallized into something cold and methodical. He wasn't backing off. Harrington settled in his seat, cracking his knuckles, chuckling under his breath, believing the scene was over. Leonard didn't leave immediately. He folded the blood-stained handkerchief into a sharp square and tucked it into his coat. That pocket had once carried church programs and little notes to his late wife. He still didn't glance at Harrington, wouldn't gift him that satisfaction. Instead, Leonard looked at the judge, then turned his gaze toward the gallery. He didn't look for allies or sympathy. He scanned the faces of people who watched, did nothing, and turned away. No judgment, only memory. Pain fades. Memory sharpens. He walked out slowly, carrying an old, familiar weight. Outside, Mason watched from his car as his father descended the courthouse steps. He didn't wave or step out. Drawing attention wouldn't help. He just watched, started the engine, and pulled away, already mapping the next moves. In his world, consequences weren't about how fast you hit. They were about how precisely. Inside, Harrington rolled his shoulders and muttered something ugly to himself. He still believed the slap would vanish like all the others. He had no idea he'd just walked into a federal blade. No clue that the blood on those glasses was about to be examined by the one man with both authority and motive to shred his protections. The system hadn't shattered today, but it had blinked. And Mason Cole knew exactly how to pry an eye open once it flinched. Beneath the grinding wheels of procedure, something had cracked and started to spread. When the courtroom door closed behind Leonard, a ghostly quiet lingered like smoke, thin, choking, impossible to fan away. Harrington stood there too long, savoring his performance, convinced he'd reinforced the invisible hierarchy exactly how it should be. Leonard didn't chase the moment. He didn't yell or plead. Instead, he weaponized something worse: indifference. He refused to acknowledge Harrington at all. He nodded once, barely to himself, to a private code older than the badge. His chin lifted just so. Not showy, just exact. He smoothed his collar with the practiced precision of a man raised when dignity had to be starched sharp like Sunday clothes and worn as everyday armor. Blood still clung to the edge of his mouth, tracing a line from lip to chin, not a smear, a single deliberate drop. He reopened the old handkerchief, dabbed twice, motions calm, eyes never leaving Harrington's face. That stare carried a weight Harrington couldn't mock away, though he tried. The lieutenant snorted loudly, trying to win back the room's attention, then turned with a guttural sound, pretending to be a laugh. "You're lucky, old man," he hissed, not bothering to face Leonard. "Lucky I didn't squeeze the damn trigger." Venom dripped from every syllable, the type of threat only believable from someone too used to power without consequence. Leonard didn't respond. No curse, no flinch. Just one last, gentle press of cloth against his lip, folding the handkerchief like he was sealing evidence. It wasn't classic defiance, it was worse. Calm dismissal. Harrington got nothing. And for men like him, silence was the cruelest rejection. At the back, a wooden chair creaked softly. Mason hadn't moved much, but now his hand shifted, fingers wrapping tighter around the seat's edge until his knuckles blanched. Veins raised along the back of his hand like old cables under sheet metal. His jaw stayed relaxed, eyes steady, face unreadable, but that grip told the truth louder than any scream. His thumb flexed, tendon taut, controlled. Not enough to make noise, but enough to say, "I felt that." A low murmur rippled as a staffer hustled toward the bench. She carried a tablet, brows knitted, tapping rapidly. She wasn't standard courtroom staff, internal affairs, the type most people ignored until paperwork went nuclear. Today, her pace meant something else: liability, lawsuits, real trouble. She showed the screen to the deputy by the judge. No words, just exchanged grim looks. The judge glanced toward a small internal monitor near the side bench, a security screen wired to courthouse surveillance rarely used in real time. Within moments, the display flickered on, timestamp blinking. 10:07 a.m. A still frame appeared. Blake Harrington's arm hung midair, Leonard's head half-turned, blood suspended between them like red paint flung mid-stroke. They replayed it again and again. Each time, another camera angle, each one stripping away any possible excuse. Harrington hadn't nudged or guided. He'd struck, purposefully, under visible cameras, without a shadow of hesitation. His hand moved like someone used to getting away with that exact motion. Mason didn't need to see the monitor. He already had. From the back row, he watched instead the faces of those watching the footage. No one spoke. No one dared. They didn't have to. The images told the story with brutal clarity. Truth rarely needed commentary. Luther. Leonard adjusted his cuffs, an old reflex reminder that his hands still belonged to him, not the system trying to claim them. He didn't ask for justice, apology, or acknowledgement. He turned and walked away instead. Not broken, not triumphant. Something deeper. The calm of a man who'd survived too many storms to be impressed by thunder. His walk said, "I've seen worse, but this time there will be an answer." Harrington rolled his shoulders, mumbling like a schoolyard bully psyching himself up, glancing around for someone to meet his gaze. No one did. Not the clerk, not the judge, not even the internal affairs staffer. He was suddenly alone inside his smugness, and for the first time, it didn't quite fit right. Mason exhaled slowly, not relief, but containment. His fingers released the chair, leaving faint indents in the wood, proof he'd been there. He rose without a word and followed his father's path out. He didn't close the door tightly. It swung on its hinges with a tired creak, like it had more to say, but had forgotten how. Outside, the sky had shifted to a flatter blue. No breeze, no rustling leaves, just a dense stillness. Underneath that calm, the system had started to sweat. The silence inside had already done its damage. Mason didn't shake it off when he left. It clung to him like a second skin as he walked toward his sedan at an unhurried pace. No tremor in his step, no flicker in his eyes. Once the door shut, the world outside ceased to matter. The car felt cooler, not from the air conditioning, but from control. He keyed the ignition, screens waking like obedient machines, ready to serve quiet purpose. He didn't pause to think. It was already done. Fingers moved by habit, entering encrypted credentials. The terminal linked to FBI black-level access, pulling up Blake Harrington's personnel file. Data opened like a wound that had never healed. Lines of incidents scrolled past, dressed in bureaucratic language that couldn't quite cover the smell. 7 formal complaints. Each one sharpened another edge of Mason's focus. The first case, construction worker, 44, spinal cord damaged during an arrest. Report language repeated like a shield. Non-compliance, necessary force, officer followed protocol. 3 times in one page, as though repetition could convert paralysis into procedure. Mason highlighted the victim's name in red, a small flare against the system's gray. Next, a 17-year-old high school student detained on suspicion of theft. Hours of unrecorded interrogation. Found dead at home a week later. Official ruling. Suicide. No internal review. Harrington's statement. Kid couldn't handle pressure. World's better off. Mason's jaw didn't tighten, but his eyes cooled another few degrees. He marked that name red as well. A nurse in her 30s followed. Traffic stop complaint for harassment and groping, dismissed for insufficient corroborating evidence. She'd written that he said, "You like a man in uniform, don't you?" Followed by threats when she objected. The phrase burned like acid. Another red mark. Then came the petty thief shot in the leg while fleeing. The bullet shredded femoral tissue, leaving him limping for life. Dash cam footage malfunctioned that night. Harrington's only verbal explanation: if he didn't want to get shot, he shouldn't run. Mason colored that file red too. A homeless woman assaulted behind a diner. Harrington first on scene. Her bruises didn't match the documented attacker's profile. His memo claimed she was hysterical and required calming. The investigation never materialized. Mason didn't hesitate. Another name in red, an undocumented worker with a shattered jaw, 3 fractures from what Harrington recorded as verbal resistance. The man didn't speak English. Harrington's note, pains universal. Red. The final case was different. Protester, mid-20s, detained after a demonstration. No body cam footage. The complaint detailed strangulation, verbal abuse, a slur carved into a holding cell stall. The file ended abruptly. Status, closed. External interference. No signature, no explanation. That phrase made Mason's eyes narrow slightly. He highlighted external interference in bright yellow and opened the security tab. A prompt flashed, elevated sensitivity, clearance required. Mason entered his override, Cole A7X13, and confirmed. The screen glitched briefly, then revealed a hidden layer of data. Black bars censored names, timestamps, evidence chains, but beneath the redactions, something leaked through. A voice transcript. Flagged. Non-replicable. Blake Harrington's voice unfiltered. That little woony, should have known better. I didn't break him, I bent him till he snapped. The words oozed pride. Brutality spoken like a joke. Mason leaned back, absorbing the mechanical coldness of what he was reading. Harrington wasn't chaotic. He was precise cruelty, rewarded and shielded for years. This wasn't incompetence, it was protection. Harrington wasn't a glitch in the system. He was what the system produced when nobody checked the rot, when brown bodies weighed less than blue fabric. Mason toggled through complaints. Each red mark formed a ledger of buried pain. He opened a secondary window, behavioral profiling matrix, input Harrington Blake, 7 flags, 3 ethics probes, 1 sealed high-sensitivity file. He added notes, pattern consistent with systemic cover, premeditated cruelty, immunity complex, recommend deep psychological deconstruction. No euphemisms. He didn't write monster. Monsters weren't gifted pensions. Monsters didn't pose for smiling badge photos. The system chimed. Command triggered a level 2 review. A notification surfaced. Oversight Division will be alerted. Continue? Mason pressed yes without hesitation. A small detail flashed. Performance evaluations. 10 straight years signed by the same supervisor. Each review repeated a line. Good instincts. Asserts authority under pressure. Mason copied the phrase, pasted it into a side file, and annotated beneath. Victims called it survival. He compiled every red-marked victim into a single list. Not a rant, not a manifesto, just names, dates, injuries, evidence stacked like bricks. Harrington didn't make mistakes. He made examples. Mason wasn't after catharsis. He was after consequences. A soft knock hit his apartment door. Routine clearance audit, probably. He ignored it. He toggled one more tab. The system's AI assistant chirped. Cumulative Severity Index, 5.4. Subject meets priority monitoring criteria. The figure glowed in red. Mason added one word. Escalate. As the monitor dimmed to standby, he didn't stretch or crack his knuckles for release. There was no release yet. His thoughts locked onto the last protester, the sealed file, the interference. Someone with real influence had stepped in for Harrington, someone with reach and motive. Mason stood, not to rest, but to move. He didn't need applause. He needed proof that could drag insulation into the light. This was step 1. The screen's afterglow still burned behind his eyes as he drove toward the edge of Prince George's County, where city lines dissolved into broken lot silence and abandoned gas stations sat like forgotten watchtowers. The sky was colorless. He wasn't checking his watch. This wasn't an appointment. It was a calculation too delicate for conference rooms. The destination, Gasway 13, mile 274. An old fueling station swallowed by weeds, plywood, and rusted metal ghosts. No working lights, no functioning signs, just a flickering, open neon hanging by one wire, struggling to remember its job. Mason pulled in without cutting the engine, eyes scanning corners. No cameras, no parked cars. The choice of meeting spot was deliberate. She was already there, perched on the concrete step near a dead vending machine. Hood pulled low, shoulders smaller than in the photo attached to her old internal affairs personnel file. Resigned, but not broken. Her eyes were sharp. Mason stepped out, movements careful but unhurried. No badge flashing, no gun drawn. They didn't shake hands. She spoke first, voice rough from disuse. "You came alone." "I always do," he answered. He wasn't being clever, just truthful. She pulled a scratched USB drive wrapped in black tape from her coat pocket. She didn't offer it like a gift, more like a warning. "Only copy. I wiped everything else. Ghost VPN, smashed the original laptop. If they audit me, I was never there." Mason took the drive without brushing her fingers. "You filed an internal complaint 3 years ago," he said. "They buried it." She nodded. He laughed about it the next day. In the elevator, she added, "Ain't nobody touching me. I'm the dog they let off the leash." Mason didn't bother reacting. He plugged the drive into a secure reader linked to his phone and opened the audio file. The recording was grainy, break room acoustics and low voices. Harrington's laugh came first, dry, smug, dripping with entitlement. Then his words, slow, savoring. "I just nudged him. One kick, he folded like a lawn chair. If he died, that's on him." "I don't kill people," he continued, tone almost amused. "I just remind them they're not built for this world." Another male chuckle in the background. Indistinct. Then the recording clipped out. Mason ejected the drive and sealed it away. "How'd you know to trust me?" he asked. She shrugged, pulling the hoodie tighter. "I watched that video. The slap." Her gaze didn't waver. Everyone else flinched, even the judge. "But you didn't blink once." "You weren't shocked," she said. "You were waiting, like you were just watching everything finally crack open." Mason nodded once. "I was." She scanned the empty lot like secrets might crawl out from behind the boarded-up pumps. "You're not like the others," she said. "They write reports and pray for approval. You're not asking anyone for permission." Mason's voice stayed level. "I don't need permission. I need evidence." She exhaled. "You've got it, but it's not enough alone. This tape's disgusting," she continued. "But they'll call it locker room talk if they want to protect him. You know that." Mason's gaze stayed fixed. "Then I'll match the tone with a body count," he said. "Paper bodies. Official." She let out something between a snort and a sigh. "You're either going to end him or bring the ceiling down on yourself." Mason didn't disagree. "As long as he doesn't walk away, I'll live with the cost." Silence stretched between them, taut as wire. The gas station hummed faintly. She rose. "You never asked my name." "I already know it," he said. "Use it only if I vanish," she answered, walking toward the trees without looking back. Mason watched until she disappeared into the woods, then got into his car. He slid the USB into a shielded compartment, powered up his secure terminal, and initiated an encrypted sync. The system responded instantly. Audio received. Transcription underway. He stared through the windshield while data moved. Harrington's words were the missing thread. Cruelty, contempt, and certainty he'd never face consequences. Confidence like that only exists when someone bigger stands behind you, holding the door open for your violence. Mason uploaded the audio to the Behavioral Ethics Board, tagging it as evidence under priority review. Classification: Category X, social dehumanization language paired with repeated misconduct. Very few even knew that category was real. He had clearance and intention. The system rerouted through thick encryption. Within moments, the confirmation appeared. File validated, composite risk level escalated to orange. Not red yet, but one shade away. Mason shut the terminal, leaned back, letting the night press against the windows. AI monitors flagged the clip almost immediately, not for swear words, but tone. Genuine glee at other people's suffering. Mason didn't wait on their full report. He had what he needed. Harrington bragging, not confessing. And behind every swaggering bully, a protector. He called the one person who could help unmask that protector, the federal oversight chief. Thomas Larrick answered with gravel in his voice. No greetings, just recognition. You've got something, don't you? Mason's reply was calm steel. Harrington and his judge. Larrick rerouted them to a secure channel and granted Mason elevated access to encrypted judicial logs. Within 30 seconds, 2 call records appeared. Harrington and Judge Edwin Hale, late-night calls, both under a minute, both tied to closed complaints. One call came days before a misconduct case was administratively retired. The other, an hour before the protester's file, was classified as irrelevant evidence. Voice analysis cross-matched Hale's voicemail greeting. Mason sent the Harrington audio. On the tape, Harrington crowed, "Hale always covers me. I drop names, he drops hammers. That's our arrangement." The silence on Larrick's end said everything. "You ready to confront a federal judge?" he finally asked. Mason's voice cooled further. "I'm ready to pull out the rotten beam holding the facade." The meeting was set for 2 hours later. No cameras, no subpoenas, just a room deep in the oversight wing, soundproofed, windowless, with one door and one recorder. Judge Edwin Hale arrived exactly on schedule, suit worth more than a year's rent, tie tightened like a noose he believed he controlled. His gray eyes tried to project wisdom. Instead, they looked practiced at ignoring inconvenient suffering. Mason didn't stand. Power doesn't bow to privilege. It waits for it to slip. "Agent Cole," Hale said smoothly, dropping his leather briefcase onto the table. "I'm told there's been some kind of misunderstanding." Mason placed a recorder between them. He slid a printed transcript across like a blade. "2 calls, both traced to your personal number," Mason said. 2 complaints closed in Harrington's favor. Right after those calls. Hale skimmed the page, chuckled once. "Brittle. I receive many calls. Some numbers I don't even recognize. We assigning guilt by telephone now?" Mason shook his head slightly. "No, by confession." He hit play. Harrington's voice filled the room. "Hale always covers me. I drop names. He drops hammers." A muscle along Hale's jaw ticked barely. He took the transcript again, lips tightening. "This is hardly admissible. Bravado from an overzealous officer." He smirked weakly. "If we criminalized exaggeration, we'd have to empty half of Congress." "No one's talking indictment, not yet," Mason said. Hale's confidence faltered. "Then what is this, Agent Cole? Intimidation? You're sitting across from a federal judge." Mason's gaze didn't waver. "No, I'm sitting across from the man who left a door unlocked for a predator. And now I'm asking why." Hale stood, color shifting from pale to flushed. Rage kept on a short leash. "I never told him to break the law," he snapped. "You just made sure no one could prove it when he did," Mason replied. "You didn't dirty your hands," he continued. "You just made sure there was always a towel ready when his were covered in blood." Hale's composure cracked. "People like Harrington are necessary. Men unafraid to do what's hard." Mason rose finally, presence cutting through the room. "Breaking spines, terrorizing victims, laughing over dead kids isn't hard. It's rot. And you fed it." Hale blanched, then flushed again. He opened his mouth, words stumbling. I never signed anything." "No explicit orders," Mason said. "You gave him belief. That's more dangerous than paperwork." The recorder's red light pulsed softly, relentless. Hale's hands trembled as he reached for his briefcase. His voice turned chalk dry. "You'll regret this, Agent Cole. Men like you burn hot and disappear," Hale said. Mason didn't blink. "Men like me don't need to last. We just have to stay lit long enough to reveal what's crawling underneath." Hale left, steps a little too quick. When the door clicked shut, Larrick stepped out from the observation room. "We've got him," he said. Mason didn't nod. He simply turned off the recorder and walked away. No celebration, only progress. Hale was one of many. First to crack. The door to power doesn't always creak. Sometimes it clicks, quiet, final. Leaving the oversight chamber, Mason carried Hale's warning like meaningless static. Regret wasn't in his vocabulary. The network had revealed seams. It was time to tug. He walked into the Federal Criminal Prosecution Office without announcement, carrying a sealed case file in one hand and a decade of ignored pain in the other. The receptionist recognized his badge, but more than that, the look in his eyes. The assistant U.S. attorney met him within minutes, a woman whose gaze had sifted through more sealed affidavits than headlines. "You move fast," she said. "I move when the system stalls," Mason replied, laying the file on her desk. Everything was cataloged: recordings, call logs, buried complaints, judicial interference, digital index of every red-marked name. She read the cover aloud. Blake Harrington, 12-year decorated officer. 7 complaints, 2 deaths, 1 judge. She looked up. "You want this federal?" Mason nodded once. "He's not a local problem. He's a pattern with a badge." She didn't argue. She opened a federal motion template for Title 18 color of law violations. Some people used macros. She handed Mason the keyboard instead. He typed every clause manually. Aggravated force, coerced statements, suppressed evidence, judicial complicity. Each word landed clean, like scars, written in digital ink. The system asked, "Request arrest warrant?" Mason didn't hesitate. "Yes." The room seemed colder suddenly. He entered his clearance token. Green light flashed. "Eligible for priority federal prosecution." The assistant U.S. attorney pulled up the arrest warrant form. Harrington's name appeared, followed by, "To be taken into federal custody without prior local notification. High risk." She passed him the document. "You're signing off on bringing down someone the system protected for over a decade," she said quietly. Mason took the pen. "He started falling the moment he touched my father," he answered. The signature landed, decisive. Ink soaked into paper like a bullet sinking into target. Quiet. Irreversible. No applause. Just a seal pressed into place. A younger prosecutor stepped in, eyes wide. "You really going after a cop? A white cop with deep backing?" "I'm going after a man who treated pain like currency," Mason said. "I'm just making the account official." No one cheered. The machinery of justice hummed as the warrant queued. Mason left with it in hand, footsteps echoing. His stride down the marble hallway felt like a countdown running backward, not toward an explosion, but toward a door that wouldn't be politely knocked. Somewhere across town, Harrington went about his day, oblivious to the rope tightening. The ink had barely dried when the real blast happened, not inside any courtroom, but online. Someone from the Winston Hill gallery finally uploaded their shaky phone video to Reddit. Harrington's slap, slowed, looping, blood glinting on Leonard's glasses. The clip jumped platforms within hours. TikTok edits set it to protest anthems. The slap replayed alongside headlines about brutality and cover-ups. Twitter then. A hashtag surged up like shattered glass, jagged and unforgiving. "You hit the wrong man." On one side of a viral split image, Harrington, mid-sneer, hand raised. On the other, Leonard, bleeding but upright, gaze heavy with history. Comment sections detonated. First came raw anger. Then came the cutting, ruthless humor. One meme plastered Harrington's face over serving and protecting his ego. Another captioned Leonard, "He didn't flinch, you should have." But one comment buried deep hit hardest. "He stayed silent. His son can make the whole system scream." Within a day, that line hit 5 million likes. Mason wasn't tagged, but internet sleuths dug up footage of him entering federal buildings. Threads analyzed his posture, his jawline, the steady way he walked. "He moves like overdue thunder," someone wrote. Mason stayed out of the public swirl. While social feeds boiled, he kept grinding through depositions. But even he couldn't entirely ignore it. His inbox filled with links, threads, teen edits of the slap reversed in symbolic payback. Internally, FBI analytics tracked sentiment. Harrington's name spiked 70,000 mentions in under 18 hours, 90+% negative. 2 old internal affairs cases reopened, not from conscience, but pressure. Harrington's accounts went silent, but silence didn't help. He'd become a symbol. People dug up footage of him joking at press conferences, zooming into his arrogant smirk. They weren't wrong. He looked like a man who thought rules were punchlines only he could deliver. A few defenders tried, clinging to missing context. Witnesses replied, "I was there. I saw the blood before anyone moved." Cable news framed it as turning point and test case. Mason didn't watch. Outside his building, someone chalked the hashtag on the sidewalk. Not spray paint. Chalk. Quiet. Undeniable. He stepped over it, not out of contempt, but momentum. The message was already burned in his mind. Across town, Harrington decided he wouldn't stay quiet. He stepped to a podium for an unsanctioned press conference, chest puffed, jaw clenched. His badge gleamed under harsh cameras. He spoke like a man cornered but still armed. "This isn't justice," he snarled. "It's a witch hunt against law enforcement, against white officers doing their job." Reporters exchanged looks, pens hesitating. Someone muttered from the back, "You hit a 78-year-old." Harrington heard it. Didn't flinch. "You weren't in that courtroom," he snapped. You didn't see the threat in his eyes. There it was, the pivot. Fear narrative over reality. Behind tinted glass at the Bureau's media center, Mason watched the live feed in silence. A junior agent asked, "Should we say something?" Mason didn't answer. He knew words weren't the next move. The warrant already was. As Harrington finished ranting and stormed off, a new tremor hit. CNN's breaking banner flashed, leaked internal email hinting at imminent FBI action. Side-by-side split screen, Harrington at the podium, and a highlighted line from a secure chain. "FBI will move on Blake Harrington. Pre-dawn. Federal scope. No postponement." The internet erupted again. TikTok countdowns appeared. "They come at dawn," trended. Harrington saw it live in his living room. His finger hovered over his phone screen. No one left to call. Judge Hale was in hiding. His lawyer dodged him. The department stopped returning messages. He opened Twitter, saw his name beside systemic brutality, and slammed the app closed. A second later, the phone exploded against the wall. The house went unnervingly quiet. Commendations on the wall seemed to shrink. The blue line flag above the liquor shelf sagged. He yanked a bottle, twisted the cap with shaking fingers. The burn inside his chest wasn't just alcohol. On the table sat a thick federal envelope stamped non-deferable summons. He hadn't broken the seal. He didn't need to. The red ink screamed all by itself. He poured again, swallowing hard, feeling something unfamiliar. Cornered inevitability. For once, he didn't have a speech ready. His uniform hung in the closet. His gun rested in a drawer. Neither could argue with what was coming. Outside, the sky dimmed, windless, the air holding its breath. Tomorrow wasn't abstract anymore. It had a schedule, a name, a face, and it wasn't his. It belonged to the son of the man he'd struck. Mourning wasn't theoretical. It was already walking toward his front door. Dawn didn't arrive in golden beams. It showed up in formation, gray sky like concrete overhead, and a quiet convoy of black federal vehicles sliding down a sleepy street that had no idea history was bending. Blake Harrington stepped outside like he still owned the sunrise. Stubble shadowed his jaw, shirt half-buttoned, sleeves rolled in forced casualness. He shut the door with one hand and lit a cigarette with the other, squinting at the still air. He didn't catch the first hand signal, didn't register the silent choreography, but he heard the boots, a dozen pairs, synchronized, deliberate. He turned lazily at first, then faster when a metallic bolt slide snapped across the quiet. He raised his hands halfway. Not surrender, confusion. Like reality had misread its script. From the front vehicle, Mason emerged. No helmet, no sunglasses. Just a black federal agent jacket and eyes burning with steady, controlled direction. His team fanned out around him, tight formation, weapons low but ready. No shouting, no theatrics. Only purpose. Harrington's voice split first. "You can't do this. You don't have jurisdiction here." Mason kept moving, holding the scarlet-stamped warrant up. "I can," he said evenly. "I do. I signed it." Harrington's hands curled into fists, cigarette dropping to the concrete. His face twisted into the same sneer that had carried him through every hearing. "This is bullshit. I'll sue you. I'll sue all of you." He lunged forward, 2 steps too fast, instinctively trying to reclaim the space he'd always assumed belonged to him. 2 agents stepped in, rifles angled low but ready, one shout cracking the morning. "Don't move!" Harrington froze mid-stride, suddenly aware every twitch now had witnesses, body cams, and a federal warrant aimed at him. His instincts screamed to bark orders, grab authority back, but his mouth stayed open and empty. Mason kept walking, boots quiet on concrete, warrant lifted like a verdict nobody in that yard could ignore. Harrington's gaze darted to the neighbors' windows, curtains trembling with curious faces hiding behind them. No backup came, no chief, no union rep. Just federal black jackets and the man whose father he'd bloodied. "Blake Harrington," Mason said, voice level, carrying farther than the rifles. "You're under federal arrest for civil rights violations under color of law. Hands higher. Don't test how quickly this street can change." Harrington lifted his arms, but his eyes still spit venom. "You think this sticks?" he snarled. "I've walked through bigger storms." Mason didn't flinch. "You've never walked through one built from your own paperwork." Zip ties bit into his wrists, louder than any applause. An agent patted him down, removing his off-duty sidearm with clinical detachment. For the first time, his badge felt more like evidence than shield. Mason watched every second, not savoring, just confirming. "Turn him," he ordered softly. Cameras caught Harrington's face as they pivoted him toward the waiting vehicles, still angry, but no longer certain the world belonged to him. As they walked him toward the convoy, a curtain across the street shifted wider. An older woman whispered, "That's him?" Another answered, "Yeah, the slapper." The word hung heavier than his entire service record. The door of the lead SUV opened. Mason paused, eyes meeting Harrington's for one brief, unblinking beat. No speeches, just consequence. Then they pushed him inside, and the morning finally belonged to someone else. The first federal agent pinned Harrington's arms, movement smooth and drilled, not improvised panic. Blake jerked, cursed, fought the hold like muscle memory refusing surrender. Then came the cold bite of metal, cuffs clamping around his wrists, followed by the sharp double click, not loud, but unmistakably, brutally final. "Get your damn hands off me," he roared. "I'm a police lieutenant." Mason stepped close enough to feel the heat of his breath. "Not today. Today you're a federal suspect." Harrington twisted again, voice cracking. "This is payback. You're doing this for your old man." Mason met his eyes, tone flat as stone. "No. This is for everyone silenced." Blake's knees dipped as they walked him toward the truck. The block stayed eerily quiet. Neighbors hidden, curtains fluttering, a couple phones lifted, recording consequence from shadows. At the gate, Harrington wrenched his head back, yelling one last time. "You hear me, Cole? I'll drag you down with me." Engines idled, waiting. Mason didn't break stride. He leaned just close enough for only Blake to hear. "Not today," he murmured. "Today, you don't set the volume." The transport door swung open. They shoved Harrington inside, cuffs biting deeper into wrists that once flashed a badge like a weapon. The door slammed with hollow thunder. Locks clunked, heavy and mechanical. Mason stood at the curb watching the convoy roll away. The air felt unchanged, but power had moved. Harrington wasn't walking through doors anymore. He was being removed. The interrogation room door clicked shut behind him, echoing in Blake's ears like a metal gavel. Beige walls, fluorescent hum, a single camera's red light blinking steadily. He sat chained to the table, short tether allowing gesture but not escape. His posture screamed pride. His eyes skittered, measuring angles, searching for leverage that wasn't there. The opposite chair sat empty exactly 9 seconds. Then Mason Cole walked in. No escort, no stack of files, just a slim folder and eyes that archived everything. He sat, placed the file down, didn't open it. The silence stretched tight. Harrington broke first, of course. "No lawyer? Thought you feds worship due process." Mason thumbed the recorder on. A single beep, then the light steadied. "You waived counsel," he said calmly. Blake leaned back, smirking. "I like a fair fight." Mason tapped a key. The wall screen flickered alive. First clip, nighttime alley, suspect crawling, leg twisted wrong. Blake's voice. "Keep crawling. Maybe you'll learn something." Harrington didn't blink. "Edited," he scoffed. Next video, woman sobbing through a forced confession. Off-camera voice, his purring, "We can do this easy, or I can stretch your night." Policy compliant. Blake shrugged. Third file, nurse showing a bruised wrist, audio catching his voice. "Don't act surprised. You know this game." His laugh crawled through the speakers. Mason said nothing, hit another key. The next image wasn't video, just a still. Small neck at an unnatural angle. Hospital form overlay. Age, 9. Cause, cervical dislocation. Suspect, Officer B. Harrington. Time of incident logged, precise and uncaring. Blake's jaw loosened. The file zoomed tighter, highlighting a birth certificate. Name, Elias Mason Cole. Blake's breath stuttered. Mason watched him, not angry, not pleading, just gravitational, like responsibility condensed into a person. Harrington swallowed hard. "Kid rushed me. I warned him to stop." "He was holding a wooden train," Mason replied, voice level. "You folded him backward over your hood." Blake's cocky mask slipped. "I didn't know he was yours." "You didn't care who he was," Mason corrected. Blake shook his head, desperation edging in. "You can't dump that on me. No jury, no judge." "There's no jury here," Mason said, voice glacial. "Just the record." Harrington's mouth worked without sound. His fingers flexed against the cuffs, chains scraping the tabletop in frustrated little bursts. "You're lying," he hissed. Mason tapped again. A scanned drawing appeared. Crayons, crooked lines. A towering blue figure, another small one with glasses and a cane. Underneath, a kid's handwriting, "Don't let them hurt Grandpa." Blake stared at the name in the corner, at the memory his badge had rewritten. "You did that," Mason said quietly, then joked about it in a locker room. Blake lurched up, chair screeching, cuffs yanking. "This isn't justice. You don't get to be judge." Mason stood too, unhurried. "Exactly," he answered. "I'm not the judge." He stepped closer, calm as a verdict. "I'm the consequence." The room stayed still. Blake didn't. Behind mirrored glass, agents watched wordlessly. No note-taking, No commentary. Just a predator unraveling in real time. The final door locked. Key sitting in Mason's quiet hand. The silence in Blake's holding cell wasn't comforting. It was clinical. It sliced past bravado, separating what he pretended to be from what he'd always been. He sat on the metal bunk, hands on his knees, eyes fixed on nothing. Uniform gone. Watch, boots, belt, all stripped. Only a gray jumpsuit remained, hanging wrong. Outside, every headline carried the same core. Lieutenant who struck elderly black man now tied to 12 rights abuse cases. Accompanying image, his hand mid-swing, face weaponized. The footage spread everywhere, national news, global outlets. Commentators didn't bother with devil's advocate gymnastics. The videos, the paperwork, the bruises spoke louder than any spin. Then someone leaked older body cam archives. One clip. Blake shoving a handcuffed man who toppled, skull cracking against curb. Blake's laugh echoed after the thud, ugly and free. Online, the outrage reignited, sharper. Hashtags evolved, from wrong man to Harrington laughs at pain. Memes paired his grin with unconscious bodies, looping cruelty over pounding beats. Back inside, his hands opened and closed. He'd seen the coverage, didn't need commentary. The guards' glances had shifted, from wary respect to something closer to disgusted curiosity. He lifted the mounted phone, dialed a familiar number. It rang twice. "You've seen this mess," Blake said. His longtime attorney answered, voice clipped. "I have. I want injunctions. Suppression motions. Flip the narrative." "You know the playbook," Blake insisted. Silence. Then, "I'm not representing you, Lieutenant." The word landed like a dropped brick. "What?" Blake barked. "We've worked together a decade." "My mistake," the lawyer replied. "I don't represent garbage." The line cut. Dial tone screamed where allies used to sit. He stood frozen, phone pressed to his ear, other hand trembling. Not from fear exactly, but from something colder. Recognition. The mask hadn't slipped. It had been yanked away. The cell door buzzed. A guard tossed in fresh gray. Administrative transfer. Media wants you buried deeper. No eye contact, no sympathy, just logistics. Blake stared at the uniform. It wasn't an outfit anymore, just generic cloth, same as everyone else. For the first time, Blake Harrington had no costume, only the face of a man the system stopped lying for. The sentencing gavel hadn't fallen yet, but the courtroom for his next appearance already felt like an execution chamber. Beige walls, tight air, eyes that had made up their minds. When Leonard Cole's name was called, the room shifted. 78, no cane, no arm to lean on. He walked not with defiance, but with unbroken structure. He took the stand, hand touching the rail lightly, swore in with a quiet, "I do," that carried more weight than most shouted speeches. Cameras leaned closer. Prosecutors kept questions precise. Leonard's answers were spare, scalpel clean. "Did you provoke Lieutenant Harrington?" "No," he said. "I just stood up." The understatement rattled around the wood-paneled walls. "What did you do after he struck you?" "I remained standing," Leonard answered. "Straightened my collar." Simple words, heavy as stone. The jury watched him, not the lawyers. Blake muttered under his breath, venom leaking. "That old bastard put me here." The judge's gavel snapped. Defendant will remain silent. But the jury had already heard enough tone. Defense tried its weak cross. "Mr. Cole, do you consider the force excessive?" Leonard met the attorney's eyes. "I consider it unnecessary," he said, "and beneath anyone wearing that badge." The word beneath landed hard. Blake leaned forward, snarling. "You people always play the victim." Gavel slammed again. "One more outburst, Lieutenant, and you'll be removed." Leonard didn't flinch. He turned his head slightly, looked at Blake with a gaze sharpened by decades. No theatrics, just a look that said, "You already lost." The judge excused him. Leonard rose slowly, scanning the room, not to bask, but to witness. Jurors, audience, even clerks straightened instinctively. Respect pulled them upright like invisible strings. When he stepped down, no one sat immediately. It wasn't protocol. It was reflex, a quiet acknowledgement that some people command honor without demanding it. Leonard left without looking back. Outside, reporters swarmed. Inside, the judge recessed. Defense counsel avoided Blake's eyes, moving like a man chained to a sinking anchor. Marcus remained seated, watching everything, saying nothing. Blake couldn't help himself. "You proud of that performance?" he spat. "Think it changes anything?" Mason rose, smoothing his jacket. "He showed me what silence means," he said, "and what violence never should." He walked past without glancing down. Blake clenched his jaw until his teeth ached, but there was nothing left to smash except his own reflection. Afternoon testimony turned technical. Analysts, policy experts, forensics. Still, Leonard's calm words hung over every chart and exhibit like a ghost, making everything else sound like footnotes. By day's end, the court adjourned. In the hallway, one journalist murmured, "Verdict's just cleanup. The real moment already happened." She wasn't wrong, and everyone who'd watched knew it. Mason's phone buzzed. Bureau updates, witness prep, mounting pressure, internal affairs requesting earlier access to transcripts. He locked the screen. Today wasn't about mechanics. It had been about truth on the record. Next day, under hotter lights, Blake took the stand himself. Cameras rolled for public broadcast. Sweat gathered early along his hairline, betrayed by high-definition lenses he couldn't intimidate. The prosecutor's questions followed Mason's blueprint, each one a small cut. Blake answered with forced confidence, then stumbled as dates, recordings, and statements began contradicting his polished script. "Did you employ unnecessary force on March 17th? "No." The screen showed his boot on a suspect's spine. His own voice. "Consider this a reminder." The jury collectively exhaled. "That video's doctored," Blake snapped. Another clip rolled. Him outside a cell, whispering, "Say it right, or I make tonight feel like a year." "Out of context," he insisted. May 22nd incident. Hospitalized teen. Blake's report claimed, "Fall from own height." Partner's statement contradicted him line by line. He floundered, clinging to foggy memory, while timestamps disagreed. Financial records, call logs, sealed complaints, every favor logged. Each denial collided with documentation. Blake's speech quickened, anger bleeding through, trying to reframe brutality as keeping order. "You didn't prevent chaos," the prosecutor said. "You created it under color of law." The phrase landed like a slammed door. Cameras zoomed in on Blake's twitching jaw. By closing questions, Blake wasn't answering. He was reacting, eyes darting, fingers tapping the rail, telling 3 different versions of one incident within 20 minutes. The record quietly devoured him. At the detention center that evening, the live broadcast replayed in the common room. Former colleagues watched without loyalty, some with open disdain, others with grim satisfaction. One officer lifted his shirt, showing an old FTO Harrington patch sewn inside his vest. "Guess this is vintage now," he muttered, letting it drop, mouth twisting. When Blake returned, nobody spoke. No nods, no "hang in there." Just the distant sound of a comedy sketch on television, mocking a fictional brutal cop with his haircut. The actor yelled, "I am the law," before being hauled away in cuffs. Someone turned up the volume. Blake sat on his bunk, breathing hard, realizing the parody wore his face. He paced the cell, steps short and agitated. Outside, a younger guard scrolled his phone. "You work this unit?" Blake asked. "Until shift change," the guard answered, eyes never lifting. I trained guys like you, Blake said. Yeah, the guard replied. They say that about dinosaurs, too. The words hit harder than a shove. Blake retreated, gripping the cold sink. He could hear them in the hall, laughing over a meme, his mugshot stamped with unlawful but confident. The caption cut deeper than any headline ever had. Dinner sat untouched on the floor, overturned tray marking frustration. The crack in the ceiling above his bunk seemed longer tonight, like the concrete itself was slowly splitting. Next morning, the courtroom no longer buzzed when he entered. It simply acknowledged him the way one might acknowledge a weather report, inevitable, already processed. A former trainee testified. Did Harrington use unauthorized tactics? Yes. Did you report it? No. Why? Because I thought nothing could touch him, the officer answered, voice thin. Did he ever say the rules didn't apply to him? He didn't need to, the witness replied. We watched him prove it. Blake shifted, face tight, rage simmering under humiliation. Later, back in his cell, the door closed with a heavier thud, like the building itself was done pretending he was special. The echo sounded almost satisfied. That night, the jail TV blared a late show monologue. The host joked about Lieutenant Slap, drawing laughs with side-by-side shots of Blake and old propaganda posters. In the dark, Blake curled on his bunk, eyes wide, breath shallow. The roar he'd once commanded had turned into mocking background noise he couldn't shut off. The silence afterward wasn't relief. It was a vacuum. It swallowed his excuses, his justifications, leaving only the raw, unvarnished truth he'd tried never to face. Morning brought another door buzz. This time, Mason stepped into the holding room alone again. No files in hand, only the quiet weight of something unfinished. Blake tried for a smirk. Look who shows up, the son of the man who ruined me. Mason sat across from him, expression unreadable. You ruined yourself, he said. You here to gloat? Blake pressed. Need your hero moment? Mason shook his head. Federal rules allow one final conversation before sentencing. I'm here for that, nothing else. Blake snorted. You want closure? Want to stare down the villain? Mason's stare stayed steady. I've seen real monsters, he said. You're just louder and better documented. I kept order, Blake snapped. While people like you hid behind desks, I walked into hell so you didn't have to. Mason didn't even blink. You walked into neighborhoods and treated them like battlefields, he replied. You walked into lives and called them threats. The badge didn't make that bravery. It made it convenient. Blake hit the table, metal ringing. I was a protector. Mason's voice tightened into steel. You were a predator. The only thing you protected was your illusion of invincibility. He leaned in slightly. Heroes don't slap 78-year-old men and call it procedure. The sentence ripped something loose inside Blake. He sank back, winded as if struck. What do you think this changes? Blake rasped. You think the system's pure now? You think they'll carve your face in marble? Mason rose. I'm not chasing statues, he said. I'm chasing paper that doesn't vanish, he added. Complaints that don't get laughed out of rooms. Blake's breath grew ragged. Cut me off. Another takes my place. Maybe, Mason said. But today, the cutting starts. Blake sagged, shoulders collapsing. There were no speeches left, just air and the buzzing fluorescent lights overhead. I hope this eats you alive, Blake whispered. Mason paused at the door. It won't, he said. It keeps me honest. Then he left without looking back. The door clicked. Blake stared at the empty space, feeling more bruised by controlled words than by any fist he dodged in the streets. Precision hurt more than punches. Time blurred. Minutes or hours he couldn't tell. The certainty he'd lived on had curdled into something sour, heavy, pressing against his lungs with every breath. His old mantra, "They don't understand our world," sounded pathetic now, even to him. The evidence hadn't just convinced others. It had cornered him in his own mind. Meanwhile, Mason walked down the hallway, footsteps measured. No victory rush, no euphoric payoff. Just the steady realization that justice, when done right, rarely feels triumphant, only necessary. Back in daylight, a reporter tried to intercept him. He declined with a single small shake of his head. No quotes, no sound bites. This wasn't a story to market. In Blake's memory, old faces flickered, rookies he'd trained, partners who'd laughed at his jokes. Their silence now was louder than any defense they might have mounted. He whispered, "I kept order," into the cell's stale air, hoping the walls would argue back on his behalf. They didn't. The words floated, empty and weightless. No voice replied, "You did good." No institution whispered reassurance. Only the faint echo of Mason's calm statement. You were never the system, just what it tolerated. Far from the jail, in a paneled federal chamber, Mason sat before a committee seal older than his family name. Cameras rolled, lawmakers watched. The world half listened. His voice stayed grounded. "I'm not here to rehash Lieutenant Harrington's crimes," he began. "You've all seen them. He was never the real story. I'm here to talk about my father," Mason said, pulling a worn photograph from his jacket. Black and white Birmingham protest, 1967. Leonard Younger, eyes already older than his years. He was arrested that day, beaten, called names you already know, Mason continued. He never raised a fist. Instead, he raised me to trust the law anyway. So I stepped inside the machine, he said. Not as a preacher, not as a pundit, but as a blade, meant to cut rot, not stability. What I found wasn't one rogue officer, Mason added. It was open doors, disappearing paperwork, rewarded silence, a polite ecosystem built to cradle his violence. This isn't just about one racist cop, he said. That framing is convenient. It lets an entire structure wash its hands and move on. My father was slapped in a courtroom, Mason continued. Some people were outraged. Some made jokes. Some hunted for excuses. He did neither. He just stayed standing. That's when I understood, he said. My job wasn't revenge. It was documentation, pressure, making sure the system heard what dignity sounds like when it refuses to scream. You asked what needs to change, Mason went on. Not just oversight. We need operational guilt, a system that punishes its own silence, not just its loudest failures. We need badges to signal service, not immunity, he said. We need agencies more afraid of ignoring abuse than of tarnishing their image. Heads around the room shifted. I don't want a medal, Mason concluded. I want files that don't vanish, complaints that don't become jokes, justice that looks like maintenance, not spectacle. He leaned back, finished. For 3 seconds, nobody said a word. Then one by one, lawmakers stood, not clapping, just rising, acknowledgement in posture rather than applause. A senior senator leaned toward the mic. For the record, she said, this is the man who sharpened the blade, not swung it wildly. Mason gathered his papers and left. The final sentencing hearing felt subdued. No circus, no chants, just a tired courtroom ready to close a chapter. Blake sat in gray, smaller than his myth. Blake Andrew Harrington, the judge read, voice steady. This court finds you guilty of 12 counts, including civil rights violations, abusive force, and obstruction of justice. You are sentenced to 25 years in federal custody without possibility of parole. No cheering followed. The words simply landed, heavy and inevitable, fastening around Blake like invisible chains. He stared at the judge's hands, waiting for some miraculous reversal, some recognition of his old status. None came. The courtroom had already accepted who he really was. The old judge he'd leaned on, Edwin Hale, was gone, replaced by a reformist who stared down at him, offering no speeches, no mercy beyond the law's exact boundaries. Outside, cameras flashed. Inside, time slowed. Mason wasn't there. He'd let go once the work was done, trusting the system, flawed but moving, to carry the rest. Across the street, a photographer caught him later anyway, alone under a forgotten statue, suit plain, gaze aimed toward courthouse windows, nothing triumphant in his expression, only completion. The editor added a quiet caption, "The agent who recentered justice." The photo didn't go viral, but it circulated among prosecutors, clerks, and judges who understood its weight. Back at his temporary office, Mason boxed his files. The task force disbanded, case-coded, and archived. He glanced at the bare spot where Leonard's photo had hung. He'd taken it down after the arrest, leaving empty corkboard. Not erasing his father, just acknowledging that part of the promise had finally been honored. Harrington, meanwhile, was processed through a bland federal intake center. ID number assigned, barcode wristband snapped on. No press, no brothers in arms, just forms and fluorescent lights. A young intern compiled a summary of the case for internal distribution. She highlighted Mason's name and scribbled in the margin, "Justice enforced without vengeance. Remember this." A retired judge wrote a quiet legal essay. What if law protects those it once failed? No direct reference to Harrington, just an invitation the system couldn't ignore. Internal affairs units in several states quietly adopted Mason's audit templates. New software flags made evidence harder to bury without triggering alarms at higher levels. It wasn't revolution, but repair. At one academy, an ethics instructor opened with a line from the Gray Standards report inspired by Mason's work. Recruits had already read it, passed through group chats like contraband truth. On anonymous forums, officers stopped debating whether Harrington was wrong. They knew he was. Instead, they argued over their own silence, wondering when indifference turned into complicity. A neighborhood pastor told his congregation, "The system didn't change because we shouted. It changed because someone kept receipts." The line traveled farther than his sermon ever had. In a dusty archive, Harrington's original file, once scrubbed and sanitized, now carried a fat red stamp. Closed. Subject prosecuted. A junior clerk taped a note beneath. This time, we didn't bury it. Letters poured into the editorial office of Gray Standards. One unsigned card read, "You printed what we lived. You printed what they hid." No signature necessary. A Georgetown law professor published The Cole Effect: Accountability Without Collapse, arguing that precise, documented cases shift institutions better than outrage alone. Her conclusion, sometimes a scalpel terrifies more than a sword. Harrington's name faded from headlines faster than expected. No martyrdom, no heroic appeal, just a sentenced man absorbed into a system he once exploited, now governed by it instead. On a podcast, a retired agent was asked about Mason. "He's clean," the man said. "There's by the book, then there's Cole. He made the book remember why it exists." At Winston Hill, an artist painted a mural. No faces, just a hand holding a battered case file, redacted lines visible, and 3 words, "Truth, logged, unburied." A nonprofit formed. No more closures. Not named after Mason or Leonard, its mission was simple: digitize complaints, guide civilians through process, teach them how paper trails save futures. Their first workshop slide, "Silence isn't neutral, it's permission." The phrase echoed through community centers more effectively than any fiery speech ever could. Mason continued declining interviews. His refusal didn't feel evasive anymore. It felt principled. He hadn't done this for fame, and he wouldn't cheapen it by performing afterward. Months later, someone spotted him in the back row of a transparency symposium. No invitation, no name tag, just watching the room the way he'd once watched a courtroom. The candid photo's caption didn't mention him. It simply read, "A man watching the space that once refused to look at itself." That was enough. Justice here hadn't arrived with fireworks. It came in signed warrants, changed protocols, uncomfortable trainings, and quiet, irreversible acknowledgments that the old way had cost too much. On Leonard's aging porch, 2 chairs rocked slowly. The boards creaked, but held. Father and son sat staring across the yard, sharing silence that felt earned. The sun slid low, smearing gold across the small front lawn. Beside them, an envelope lay on the table, edges softened from being opened and refolded repeatedly. Inside, A letter written in thick blue crayon from an 8-year-old named Caleb. My mom showed me your video, it read. She says you're about justice. I don't know what that means yet, Caleb had written, but I want to be like you. I promise I won't hit people to prove anything. Mason had read it 3 times before handing it to Leonard. The letter unnerved him in ways crime scenes never had. Kids saw through slogans. Leonard read, folded it once, set it down without commentary. Their shared silence wasn't empty. It was punctuation at the end of a brutal, necessary sentence. You didn't say anything today, Leonard finally murmured. At the hearing. Mason kept his gaze on the sky. Didn't need to. The record talked loud enough. Yet that boy wrote you, Leonard said. Because words reach places court orders never will. He paused. He'll think you're why the world makes sense. No, Mason answered quickly. He'll know someone pushed back. That's all I want. The breeze picked up, rustling leaves and the envelope between their chairs. I know what you left out, Leonard said. The nights with his file open, the doors slammed in your face, the colleagues who told you to drop it. I didn't need applause, Mason replied. I needed clarity. Leonard's eyes softened. And did you get it? Mason considered. No, he said. I gave it. You didn't choose revenge, Leonard added. You chose correction. Mason frowned slightly. What's harder than justice? Correction, Leonard said. Justice needs proof. Correction needs patience and pain. The truth of that settled around them like a third presence. Porch light flicked on automatically, catching the crayon strokes, making Caleb's words glow faintly in the dusk. Mason glanced at the empty chair that once belonged to his mother. For the first time, it didn't feel like absence, it felt like part of the circle. I used to think justice meant closure, he said quietly. Now I think it just means nobody else has to carry the same weight alone. And if they do? Leonard asked. Mason didn't hesitate. Then we do it again. Same way. With receipts, not rage. A simple promise, heavier than oaths. Leonard, leaned back, eyes on the fading sky. He'd seen marches and hoses, rigged juries, and quiet lynchings. This felt different, not louder, just finely directed. You know, Leonard said, I used to think all this standing back up didn't matter. Thought tomorrow would just bring another boot anyway. Mason listened, hands still. Then I saw how that boy spelled your name, Leonard continued. Just Mr. Mason. Not agent, not hero. Someone real, not a symbol. I wasn't trying to be a symbol, Mason said. Exactly, Leonard replied. That's why it worked. A dog barked in the distance. Someone's screen door slammed. Life continued. Ever think about quitting? Leonard asked. The bureau? Mason clarified. Leonard nodded. Mason's jaw flexed. Every day, he admitted. And every day I don't. I don't stay because I think it's perfect, he added. I stay because too many people think it's hopeless. Somebody has to prove them wrong sometimes. I'm not naive, Mason said. This didn't fix everything. Leonard shrugged. Didn't need to. It just proved fixing is possible. That's more than we used to have. You know what scares men like Harrington? Leonard asked. Mason shook his head. Paperwork, Leonard said. Signatures, logs. The one thing they can't throw a punch at. Mason let a small smile slip. Harrington hadn't been toppled by outrage. He'd been dismantled by the same statutes he weaponized, wielded by someone unwilling to look away. Think others will follow? Mason asked. The ones still hiding behind badges? Leonard exhaled. Some will dig in, some will run, some will sweat. For tonight, that's enough. They fell quiet again. When Mason finally rose, the boards barely creaked. He set Caleb's letter beside Leonard, adjusted his jacket, glanced toward the gravel road. Tell Mom good night, he said. Leonard gave him a look. She's been gone 5 years. Mason nodded. She still listens. Then he stepped into the dark. Next morning, Leonard placed the letter on the mantel. Outside, the empty porch chair cast a long, clean shadow, proof that sometimes legacy is simply what no longer needs fixing. Lesson 1. Silence hurts more than noise. If you're over 65, you've seen this country promise justice again and again. Yet in that courtroom, you watched a black woman in a white shirt treated like she was dirt on the floor. The officer's slurs, the note that said, "Go back to the jungle," the stares that looked away, all of it showed a hard truth. Silence is not neutral. Every clerk who froze, every juror who pretended not to see, helped his cruelty breathe a little longer. Many of us once stayed quiet to avoid trouble. Now we know that quiet comes with a cost. Lesson 2. Self-defense is not disrespect. When she finally struck back, she didn't swing wild. She moved like someone who had spent years defending this country, not attacking it. One clean hit, and the man who thought he owned the room hit the floor. For older Americans who remember fire hoses, guard dogs, and know your place, that moment carried a special weight. It said in plain terms, "My body, my dignity, and my life are not yours to handle." Self-defense, especially for Black Americans, is not rudeness. It is survival. Lesson 3. The real question is what we do next. The most important part of this story didn't happen in the punch. It happened afterward. The clerk who resigned, the veterans who spoke up, the parents teaching their grandchildren not just to be polite, but to be prepared. At our age, we're thinking about legacy. Do we tell our grandkids we kept our heads down, or that we finally said enough? Her story invites us to choose, keep letting silence rule the room, or use the wisdom of our years to challenge it. Friends, after hearing how one woman refused to stay silent, even in a courtroom built to keep her small, I'd love to hear from you. If you had been sitting on those benches with all the years and experience you carry, what do you believe is the right moment to finally stand up, speak out, or even push back? Have you ever stayed quiet and later wished you hadn't? Share your story in the comments. Tap like if this touched something in you. And don't forget to subscribe so we can keep learning, remembering, and growing together.